You're live. You're live. So, start coming on. I'll tell you.
Hi all, I'm Aurora Meyer and I'm here with author Brian Ketcher for our very first summer book club discussion. Brian, let's get started by telling us a little bit about yourself.
All right, I'm Brian Ketcher. I'm a Missouri teacher. I am the school librarian and computer teacher at North and South Park Elementary in Moberly, Missouri. And I have written 5 young adult novels. We're talking about my 4th today, The Improbable Theory of Anna and Zach.
Let's get started with the origin story of Anna and Zach. How did you come up with the idea? How did you get started?
All right. Well, my editor called me up and said, Brian, have you ever heard of the book Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist by David Levithan? And I said, I have read that. If you're not familiar with that, it's about a couple of very popular high school students who over the course of one crazy evening do a lot of just really adventurous stuff, go to clubs, go to parties, and begin to fall for each other. And my editor said, Brian, I would like you to write a book like that, only I don't want the kids to be popular. I want them to be nerds. And I said, all right, you have come to the right guy to write a book about nerd love. But I thought, okay, a couple of geeky kids, they're not going to go to parties or concerts or nightclubs. Where would they go that would be open all night and a lot of exciting things would happen? And I thought, Comic-Con. I've been going to Comic-Cons every year since about 1993. A lot of crazy things happened there, and I thought I absolutely have to set a book at one of them.
So did the setting come first or the characters come first?
I believe the setting kind of came first, and I kind of bounced the characters off the setting. Zach was the kid who goes to 5 cons every year. He knows everybody. He dresses in costume. He plays the games. He doesn't sleep for 3 days. And as somebody who's very unfamiliar with con culture, and all of this is new and frightening and kind of exciting for her.
All right. We've talked a lot about the editing and revision process in some of our previous discussions. What was left on the cutting room floor? Was anything?
A lot is always left on the cutting room floor. It's that's one of the hard things about being a writer is you come up with these great, wonderful scenes, and then you realize they have absolutely no place in your book, and you have to get rid of them. There was one scene where Anna and Zach get in a big fight, and Zach storms off into a panel discussion with this TV star from an old science fiction show, and Anna follows them in there, and then they realize that there's nobody else in the panel, so they start fighting, and this guy basically ends up moderating their argument. Another one, this was based on a real-life con experience, is that in a deleted scene, Anna and Zach go back to a hotel room. They don't think they're ever going to find Clayton, and they're going to take a 2-hour nap, but end up just laying in a bed in a room filled with 20 people talking about what they should do. And finally, a guy gets angry and yells at Anna to shut up. And she says, Mr. So-and-so, you were a substitute teacher in my third class last year, humiliating the guy. Well, that happened to me once. I was sharing a room in college with a bunch of people I didn't know. Some guy turns on the TV like at 7 in the morning, and I yell at him. And then a few months later, I'm substitute teaching, and there he is in class, and he tells the whole class that story. So
this is an excellent segue to one of our submitted questions, which is, you seem to be really in tune with the mindset of your characters and their challenges and kind of where they are. Is there some similarity to your experiences growing up or during that time in your life that you relied pretty heavily on for the book?
Pretty much in all my books, I rely on my teenage years. Almost all my characters are nerdy guys who they're smart alecks, they're funny, they have difficulty talking to girls, and that was very much what I was like as a teenager. I just really pull from those experiences, and it works well for me. Every time I try to write a protagonist different from me, it becomes harder. Anna was a very challenging character because not only was she female, but she was the opposite of who I was back then. Very studious, very serious, very solitary. So she was a very challenging character to write.
Okay. Another one of our previously submitted questions is, do you try to keep a separation between the grade level you teach and your older target audience, or is there some overlap?
It's separate, and it's very easy to do that because my students are kindergarten through second grade, and I really wouldn't recommend any of my books to anyone 12 or younger. So they're very separate. Sometimes I'll tell my kids, hey, I wrote some books. They vote on the Show Me Awards, and I say my book has been nominated for the Gateway Awards. So it's a similar thing. And they all say, well, can we read it? No, no. Yeah. But high school students in my district, they do read it, and I've heard from them.
What have they said?
They said they enjoyed the book. They're hoping to read more. I've been asked for me to sign their copies or advice on their own writing, which I think is great. One of my biggest regrets is I never wrote a single creative thing until I was 25. I never wanted to be a writer, and I wish I had started when I was in high school because I would be so much better at it than I am now.
What made you get started?
What made me get started? I was living in the country of Mexico. My girlfriend told me, by the way, I'm moving to Germany, adios. And I thought, okay, well, here I am, bummed out in Mexico. I got to write a book.
Okay. All right. We have a couple of live participants. I think Jen Baldwin from Jasper County R5 was planning to join us, and she may be a little bit delayed. Lauren may also be there. So if you're here, hi, we're so excited to have you. If you guys have any questions or if there's anything you want to ask Brian, you can use the chat window, which is, I think, on the left-hand side of your screen. There's a little blue square that if you click on that, it'll bring up the chat window. So please feel free to use that and submit any questions. You probably get to talk to high school students. What is your one piece of advice for someone who wants to be an author, who wants to do some writing?
My advice to people who want to be writers, I say the big thing you have to do is actually write. And it seems that's obvious, but Stephen King says people come up to him and say, I always wanted to be a writer. And he'll say, well, I always wanted to be a brain surgeon. So people talk about writing, but they don't always do it. And like I said, it's like playing a musical instrument or playing a sport. You don't start out good at it. You have to work and work and work at it. And if you start when you're in high school and just keep at it, by the time you are at the point where you think I'd like to submit this for publication, your writing will be so much more polished, so much more mature. You'll be glad you did it. And I also say get a lot of feedback from whoever you can. I never would have been published without my writers group. We meet twice a month, and they say what they like, but the important thing is you got to get some people who say what they don't like. People say, Brian, this is where your character came off as unlikable. This is where it got boring. This is where it got confusing. If you can get people who are going to give you the honest answer to honestly say this is where you could improve, they're going to be much more helpful than 1,000 people saying this is great. And I also say you're going to hit some patches where it's going to be very discouraging. You're going to get the rejections. You're going to get people who turn down your writing, and you can tell they didn't even read it. And that happened to me dozens of times. 15 years ago, somebody picked up a manuscript and said, Harry Potter Boy Wizard, that's never going to make any money. No, thank you. It happens to everyone, and you just got to keep at it.
Tell us a little bit more about how the process went for you. So you started the writing and you did the submission, and you said you got some rejections. Take us start to finish.
Okay, well, I started writing my very first book, Playing with Matches. I finished it when I had moved back to the United States. And once I finished the book, I realized I had no earthly idea what the next step was. How did the book magically go from my laptop to a library shelf or a bookstore? So I joined my writers group. They told me to rewrite the entire thing. They just said, Brian, if you're serious about this, you got to rewrite it. Your characters are interchangeable. You never describe the setting. Your plot trajectory is all over the place. So I rewrote that. Then I got the book. It's called Writer's Market. It was about that thick. And I took down the addresses of every publisher and agent in the United States, Canada, and Great Britain, and wrote to every single one of them that said they published young adult stuff. And, nowadays you would do this electronically, but back then, way back 10 years ago, you had to send out a actual physical letter and send your manuscript out printed out. So, I would wait and I would wait and I would wait, and you'd open the mailbox and there is your dreaded self-addressed stamped envelope, and it's a big fat rejection, but you open it anyway, and there's the form letter. Dear author.
Not even your name?
Not even, never had
Oh,
I think one time it said, Dear Brian, and dear author, thank you very much for your submission. Unfortunately, it does not meet our needs at this time. Please consider us in the future. Sincerely, some bozo.
Do they keep your manuscript, so you don't even get your manuscript back?
You can get your manuscript back. Nowadays, it's a moot point because it's electronic, but right. You send it off and the post office mutilates it, and then you get it back, and you don't want to send a crumply looking thing. So back then we would just usually instruct them to recycle it, and especially since they would ask for different numbers of pages. But all it took was that one person who said to say maybe. Maybe. I had
sure
entered.
Maybe's never been so exciting.
It was very exciting. I had entered a contest and I didn't hear anything for so long. I thought I just didn't win, and they hadn't even bothered to tell me. But one day I got an email from an editor with Random House, and she said, you didn't win, but I like this. I think your book has potential, and I'm going to give you some suggestions, and if you'd like to rewrite it, I'll look at it again. So I thought, wow. It was just at the end of the school year, so I thought I'm going to spend the entire summer writing this book, and nothing is going to distract me from this. And then less than a week later, my wife comes up to me and says, guess what, honey, I'm pregnant. So I thought, okay, I'm very distracted now, and I only have 9 months to do this. But fortunately, the editor, we came to a spot where she liked it, and she published it.
How do you find it? You're a parent, you're a teacher. How do you find time to keep writing? I mean, you've published 5 books already. Right. How do you find time?
Fortunately, being a teacher and my wife being a teacher, we have summers off. So I have 3 months to work on books. Unfortunately, the editing process doesn't fall along the school year. So I've been told to do some massive editing starting in September. That's always fun. I don't need a lot of sleep. My family's usually in bed by about 9:30, so they can give me a couple hours at night, and I'll be hitting my stride around 1 in the morning and think, oh, I have to get up and teach in a few hours. I have to stop. So it's like anything you love. You have to make time for it. And fortunately, my family has been very supportive, given me time to sit in front of the laptop, or more likely wander around the house talking to myself as I hash something out.
Okay. Is there a part of the writing process that comes easy to you?
I guess the favorite part of the writing process is just coming up with a story idea and kind of figuring out who the characters are going to be and what's going to happen to them. My least favorite part is the editing, where I have to go back and rewrite the whole darn thing.
Do you get people that ask you to continue the story?
Yeah, it was especially true with my book Almost Perfect, which ended on somewhat of a sad note. Not a cliffhanger. It was just a sad, kind of a sad ending. A lot of people said, "So what happened next?" And I always say, it's you enjoyed a book if you want to know what happens next. And I always say it's whatever you want to happen. That's how it worked itself out. Yeah.
All right. Do we have any questions? It sounds like we've got a number coming in.
Yeah. Lauren Mertz asked, and this is something you talked about, but if you could just touch on it again. She wanted to know, she jumped in a little late, wanted to know back about what you had first, the plot, the characters, the problem.
Okay, so Lauren, for those of you that may not have heard Todd, who's our super great moderator in the background, Lauren Mertz, who is one of our participants, asked about what came first, the plot, the characters. What came first?
This was, I'm kind of unusual as a writer, is sometimes my editor will just give me an assignment and say, here's the plot and here's the characters. However, she gives me a lot of leeway as to how I develop those characters and what I do with it. The idea to set this at a Comic-Con, and all she basically said is, Nick and Nora with nerds, go. So I thought, okay, I'm going to set this at a Comic-Con, and I thought about all the things that have happened to me at Comic-Cons, all the sort of people I met, thought about the best sort of people to experience it. And I thought we got to have somebody who's an old hand at it and somebody who has no idea this sort of thing even exists, and just dump them into the mix. When coming up with the actual plot, there are two schools of thought on that. I know a lot of people, they just like to plot everything out. They have the absolute outline. They know what's going to happen in chapter 1, chapter 5, chapter 20. It's all ready to go before they even sit down. I, on the other hand, like to just say, okay, here's what happens at the beginning, here's what happens at the end, let's go for it. And my characters often go in directions I never expected them to. Things happen I never planned on. Problem with writing like that is you get to page 200 and think, I know what should have happened on page 3. Well, too late to put that in now, and I am pretty much resigning myself to an extra round of rewrites.
Okay, all right. Do we have any others?
Yeah, Jen Baldwin wants to know, she says it's a fun book. How do you suggest book talking it to students that think the title means it's just a romance?
Okay, so for those of you that didn't hear the question from Jen Baldwin that Todd so graciously gave to us, how do you talk to students who think that this is just a book about romance?
That's a good question. Hi, Jen. How you doing? We know each other. That's you get into the whole judging a book by its cover. Almost Perfect, for instance. I think this cover may be off-putting to a lot of boys because it really looks like a kissy-face romance. I think with the popularity of Comic-Con, the popularity of geek culture, TV shows like The Big Bang Theory, a good way to recommend it is if you're into Dungeons and Dragons, if you like going to Comic-Con, if you like science fiction, this is a book you may enjoy. I mean, just saying the word Comic-Con, that's going to draw a lot of people who think, I don't want to read a romance book. And the pixelated cover that draws a lot of people who like video games. There's been a lot of good books like that. And I'm trying to think of The Geek's Guide to Unrequited Romance came out recently. It was a book. I'm glad it came out after mine, so mine wouldn't be negatively compared to that. It was very good. And there's been quite a few others. So you could do if you like this book, then check out this book.
A recommendation kind of
right.
thing. So for I mean, there is romance in your book. It's not like the main exact. How do you talk about that? How do you talk about that with your students? Not your students, but your audience.
There, in just about every novel, unless it's like a war novel, there's going to be some sort of romance, and maybe it's going to be the central focus of the plot, or maybe it's just going to be the romantic subplot. And you'd be very hard pressed to find any book without any sort of romance in it. So, and I don't think a lot of people are turned off by that per se. I mean, it's going to happen. I think some readers don't want to see this bodice ripper Harlequin romance. They want good characters, as they should. Just because it's a romance doesn't mean the characters have to be shallow.
It's bringing to mind The Princess Bride.
Right.
Is there kissing? Is there going to be kissing in this book?
It's funny you mentioned that. When I first heard of that movie, I thought, The Princess Bride. I really
judged a book by its cover.
I judged a movie by its title, and it is one of my favorite books and movies now. Very, very excellent.
Great. What's the next
Jen
question?
has a follow-up. She wants to know if you could put music to this book, what artists or songs would you suggest?
If Brian could put music to the book, this is another Jen question. What music or songs would you put to it?
Boy, you may be asking the wrong guy here. Back when music stores were popular, my favorite section was miscellaneous. I mean, I would be in the comedy bin, the spoken word bin. I have a very eclectic taste in music. I really liked the scene where they are all at the folk circle where they're folk singing. That's one of my favorite parts of a con. I think you could get a lot of the folk music on this, just the silly songs, the parodies, Luke Ski, Tom Lehrer, Weird Al Yankovic, just a lot of the parodies of science fiction stuff or pop culture stuff. I don't know that this book would work well with a lot of popular tunes. It's kind of the opposite of Nick and Nora, if you will.
So would this be different than the sounds at a Comic-Con?
The sounds of a Comic-Con, it depends on what time of the day you are, and the later you get, the more people have had their Romulan ale, and it gets louder and louder there.
Okay. This is another submitted question. You have quite a following on Goodreads, more than 3,400 ratings. How do you balance life as an author with that of a teacher? We've talked a tiny little bit about this, but I know there's more tips and tricks you have.
You know, if somebody asks me, are you primarily a writer or primarily a teacher, I would definitely say I'm primarily a teacher. That is, you know, if you really want to annoy a writer, ask them, so what do you really do? No, I'm very happy to call myself a teacher. This was my 20th school year. I taught kindergarten before I was a librarian, and I will do this until I retire. People always are saying, I bet if you got that movie deal, you'd quit teaching. And I don't think I would. I think I will continue to do this till I can retire. I am lucky as a librarian that I don't have as much take-home work as a classroom teacher does. My wife teaches fourth grade, so she has so much more take-home work than I do. I don't have homework to grade, don't generally have parents to meet with, because my lessons are I'll teach like one lesson to first grade a week, so my lesson plans are much shorter. I'm very lucky to have a career that allows me time in the evenings and summers to pursue writing.
Okay, so I got to ask, is there a movie deal in the works?
No. I wish I could say it was happening, but unfortunately not at the moment. I'm just waiting for Hollywood to call and say, it's going to happen. A few years ago, Philip Seymour Hoffman's production company sent a letter saying they were a little bit interested in playing with matches, and then he died. So I guess the lesson here is do not shoot heroin.
Yes, obviously. Drugs are bad.
Yeah.
Another question that we've got goes back to some of the earlier drafts discussion that we had earlier in our conversation. So what changed? There were reactions from readers initially when you first submitted it to your writers group. What were some of the changes you made there?
My writers group, they really helped me with the nuts and bolts stuff. It's my editor who is kind of the end-all say-all on what needs to change. The book ended a little differently originally. I did not have the drug dealer in it. It was Cyrax, the Zach's nemesis, who was causing the problems. And it may have, if there's one thing I read from readers, is they didn't like the drug dealer. They thought he was over the top. I just wanted to give Anna a chance to stand by herself and, honest to God, play the hero. I wanted her to be brave and do something that she felt like she had would never have been able to do before that night.
Okay. All right. Because I know you're an avid reader, what titles would you suggest for students that come in and ask for a book that's similar? You talked about Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. And you talked about a couple that I can't remember.
It was The Geek's Guide to Unrequited Romance. That's another book that takes place at a Comic-Con. It's about this guy. He is best friends with his neighbor named Roxy. They're going to Comic-Con, and he's going, this is the year. I'm going to tell her I like her. Best friends to boyfriend, it's not gonna, it's an easy transition. Of course it's not, especially when she meets a guy at the Comic-Con. They start hitting it off, and oh my God, he's British. He has that to contend with. There's another one which I'm kicking myself because I loved it so much and I cannot remember the title. It's about a kid. He's a big geek. He spends all his time playing video games, so much that his father and his new wife are getting concerned. Well, one day he has to go off and run an errand, and he meets a girl, and they hit it off. And she says, I don't do that social media stuff, but when he asks her out, she says, okay, let's meet at a restaurant next Thursday. However, when he gets home, he finds out his father has become so concerned, he's sending him off to a video game rehab. And he has to go off into this place in the Utah desert to get off the video games. And the camp is set up like a video game. You have to earn 1 million points till you get to go home, which takes about a month. And our hero says, hell with that. This is the beta version, and I can exploit the problems. I'm going to get out of here in 4 days. So
it sounds like a fun book.
It's a very fun book, and if you Google video game rehab, you'll come up with it. It has a pixelated cover. Really enjoyed that one.
Are there other genres you recommend, or that you feel would be a good companion to this one?
I think we're lucky to be living in this day and age, because when I was in high school, young adult books were not really a genre. People didn't consider teenagers to be young adults, but to be older children. So the books were very sweetness and light, or very preachy. And it was about 15 years ago, somebody thought, wait a minute, teenagers want to read good books about interesting characters and exciting stuff. So I have just fallen in love with the whole YA genre. If you go to the website Forever Young Adult, all one word, foreveryoungadult.com, I do book reviews there. So you can, I've done about 200 there, and you can look up and see what books I've enjoyed and what books my co-bloggers have enjoyed as well.
Great. Well, I think that is, we've got one more question coming in.
The only other question that we have is there anything that your editors cut that you really wanted to have in the book that's not there?
The question is there anything that your editors cut that you really, really, really wanted to?
Not in this particular book. Usually my editor is very good about letting me say, I just really want to do it this way. I think back to another book that eventually it wasn't published. I said, I want to do it this way. She says, I think you should do it this way. And we went back and forth. And finally she said, you know that writers group you're always going on about? Take the problem to them and see what they say. So I thought, well, okay, it's my writers group. They're going to agree with me. And they all agreed with her. They all said, you know what, your editor really has a point there. Just do it her way. So she's very good about letting me have creative control. But there have been times where she said, we're going back and forth. So let's compromise and do it my way.
Okay. What's next? What are you working on now?
I have a book completed, though my editor said it wasn't a good fit for her, so I'm trying to find a new home for that. It's called It's Complicated, and hopefully I will find a good home for that, yeah. And there's probably 4 or 5 other books in various stages of completion I'm also would like to find homes for.
How do you manage that? How do you, I mean, obviously you know your characters very, very well, but how do you manage multiple books going at one time? I
don't usually work on one book, more than one book at a time. I just become so invested in the plot and the characters, I can't really shift gears. The one time I tried to work on 2 books at the same time, neither of them ended up being published. I like to give my full concentration to one project.
Because you're so vested in your characters, do they disappoint you in any way?
They can. You feel like you become a father to some of the characters, and in Almost Perfect, I originally had planned for a happy romantic ending, and Logan, the main male character, I just became really disappointed in him, and I thought, you really let Sage down one too many times, and quite frankly, I'm not surprised she broke up with you. And it's funny because I created all that, but I thought, wow, he just really was a jerk. He was a jerk when she needed him most, and I'm not surprised that they ended up going their separate ways.
So we've talked about how they disappoint you. Do they surprise you in any way?
They really do, because I don't plot everything out to begin with. There's so many things, so many plots, so many characters that end up in the finished product that I hadn't even occurred to me in the planning stage, or there were main characters that were completely dropped that I thought were going to be a major part of the plot.
It sounds like it's a really fun process for you.
It is. It's exciting, and it's frustrating, but I love it, and I can see myself doing this forever.
Great. Well, we super appreciate everybody tuning in. If you missed this live, feel free to watch it again. And if you've got other questions, send them our way. Be sure to keep your eye out for more details on our July read, The Serpent King. We've got information on it on our website. It's one that Brian recommends, so you're in good hands. Thanks so much again, and have a great day.
Thank you.